My boyfriend recently showed me a post by a man whose mother had survived an attack by Ted Bundy, knowing about my fascination with serial killers, and suggested I tell my mother's story about her brush with the serial killer. This took place early August in 1989, in Scarboro, Ontario. My mother was a stay-at-home mom at 23 who also ran a small daycare service from our home. My father worked 2 jobs, but money was tight and our neighborhood was becoming increasingly dangerous with muggings and gang activity. So my mom decided to try and find an overnight job she could work the nights my dad didn't in order to save money to buy a new house in a safer neighborhood. Money being tight and not being able to afford a babysitter, my aunt, who worked in an office building only a few blocks from the job interview my mom was to attend, agreed to watch my sister, who was then 4, and myself, who was only a year old. My mother dropped us off with my aunt and headed to the interview. She arrived earlier than she thought she would and decided to stop in the lobby and have a cigarette to calm her nerves. That's when a tall, blonde man approached her with a movie star smile and asked for a light. Being polite, she handed him her matchbook. This man was handsome and well-dressed, but something about him made her feel uneasy. He told her she had beautiful eyes, and being a married woman with small children, that was enough to make her feel uncomfortable. She mumbled that she had to go and hurried away to her interview. After the interview, she was heading down the street and she felt someone staring at her, but when she turned around, she saw no one. She came and retrieved my sister and I from our aunt's office and headed to the bus stop. It seemed as if, out of nowhere, a man appeared before her with a,
"I found you."
She turned her head to see the man, his face leaning in towards hers. In his hand, the matches she had not even realized she had left with him. He leaned closer towards me. My mother was wearing me on her chest and my sister was holding her hand. He then told her that I was a little angel, then looked at my sister and told her we both were. He grabbed her hand and pushed the matches into her palm and grinned one last time and said,
"I hope to see you soon."
She said the way he said it made her skin crawl. Something about that perfectly plastic white smile with dead eyes. When she got home, she called my aunt and they chalked it up to being on high alert. The Scarboro rapist had already attacked 14 girls and women, and they were constantly being reminded to be on alert by the media and even posters on the street. But after all, he hadn't done anything too suspicious. Skip ahead to February 17th of 1993. Paul Bernardo is arrested for the murders of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, in addition to various other suspected crimes. When my mother saw his photo, she immediately froze and realized that the man with the matches 4 years ago was Paul Bernardo. She was terrified and relieved all at once. She called my dad immediately at work, and when he came home that night, she told him in the pit of her stomach she knew that he was also the Scarboro rapist. Skip ahead to late April of 1994. My mother receives a summons for jury duty. She fills out the questionnaire and returns it within 5 days asked of her, hoping that the information she had provided would somehow disqualify her, since she was running a small daycare from home, as well as taking care of my sister and I. Much to her frustration, she was summoned to be on jury panel. She sat through the jury panel and was assigned a jury to serve on Paul Bernardo's case. Obviously terrified and physically sick, she was able to convince a court officer that, with her home business, 3 children, and the fact that she was still recovering from a recent hysterectomy, meant there was no way she could serve. We moved to a city outside of the GTA, and I honestly didn't know any of this until I got a true crime book when I was about 13 that had a chapter on Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka in it. I asked my parents if they knew anything about it because I knew, based on the dates, that we had lived in Scarboro then. I have asked her about it again as an adult, and it's just as terrifying. We talked about it recently after she sent me an article on Facebook announcing he was applying for early day parole, which is when I told my boyfriend the whole story. Serial killers and other morbid things that fascinate me are not something I discuss with him often because he's a scaredy cat and not a horror fan. I'm sure that my mother and I aren't alone in hoping that Paul Bernardo never gets parole and eventually dies behind bars. I tell this story all the time to my friends and feel it would be a good fit here. As a little background, at the time this occurred, I was a 22-year-old female and had just graduated culinary school. I needed a job and did not want to remain in the city that I had finished school in. I had a relative that worked in the administration area of the state prison located in my hometown. Now, due to the nature of this place, and my not being entirely sure what the rules are for identifying some people and places, I will have to be a bit vague in my descriptions, and I apologize for that. I will say that it was a prison designed originally for high security inmates, but due to lack of other facilities in the state, the population ended up getting mixed. The population ended up being a mix of low and high security people. My relative told me that there was an opening in the food production area of the pen. As a supervisor, it paid well, had benefits, and really did look good on a resume. I was interviewed for the position and was hired, and moved back to my hometown. I was pretty much just thrown into the job and spent my first couple of months before and during training. I worked in the main facility, supervising the inmate workers in the chow hall, escorting them by myself between the different areas of the facility to deliver and pick up chow carts, and etc. Just to be clear, in this place, you were always on camera, have a radio on your belt, a distress panic button, and all sorts of other security. It was still kind of creepy though. Once I finished training, I was moved over to a separate facility where the actual cooking and production was done. As soon as I got there, I started hearing about a man who went by the title of BB and was a senior guy at the facility amongst the inmates, and was a serial killer. At the time, he was in a different state, facing charges on what local authorities believed were several more of his victims after remains were found in the area. Needless to say, I was a bit intrigued. So about a month later, B comes back, and I will never forget meeting him for the first time. First off, he was enormous, about 6'5" and 300 pounds, but not fat. He had gigantic hands and feet and icy blue eyes. He was also extremely quiet, polite, and a very hard worker. He was kind of my right-hand man, as he was very familiar with the facility and had been working the kitchen for years. Most of the guys I worked there with were fine, and most liked me, as I, will go by the name A, was a young girl, and B made the food taste good. There were guys in there for drug offenses, lifers that just wanted to keep their noses clean and live with as little hassle as much as freedom as possible, and many general low-threat guys. There were definitely still assholes and creeps though, but that's the name of the game, I guess. I never really felt threatened, especially after one afternoon working with B. Another inmate had jokingly come up behind me and said, "Boo," laughing about how he had gotten me. He then went on his merry way, and B came up to me, a very serious look on his face, and said,
"If anything ever happens here, or someone messes with you, you come find me, and I'll take care of you."
I was kind of taken aback, but I hate to say this, flattered at the same time. No one messes with B, and most seemed almost in awe of the guy. Some of the stories they told me about him were nuts. So yeah, it felt kind of good to know that he was on my side, I guess. I will note that, as far as anyone's aware, he only killed men, and he was always polite to female staff, almost to the point of shyness. I never ever felt scared of or threatened by B, until one day, B and I were setting up the conveyor area where we filled and loaded the chow trays for the other facility. We were loading the big trays of enchiladas onto a cart when this little asshat called Skeeter started giving me crap. He had only been in the kitchen for a few weeks and had been a total creep and jerk to me from the moment he had showed up. I don't remember exactly what he was saying to me, but I was getting pissed and a bit flustered. B was bent over and placing a tray on the cart when he suddenly stopped and looked up at Skeeter and said in a low voice, almost under his breath,
"Don't start that shit, Skeeter."
I don't know what it was about how quickly and drastically his demeanor changed, but I unconsciously took a step back. Those crazy blue eyes were focused on Skeeter, and the tone of his voice was so serious and sinister, it scared the crap out of me. Even though Skeeter was a little further away, and I didn't think he had heard what B said, he knew something was up too. He went white, mumbled an apology, and hurried off. I was still pulled back, staring at B with my mouth open. And just like that, he smiled, straightened up, and said something along the lines of,
"Now that that's done, what's next?"
And we went about our day. I ended up quitting not too long after. Working in a prison is rough, especially for a female my age. All of the other inmates told me that B was a fantastic artist, and at the time I left, I was told he was working on a drawing for me. I never got it, but that kinda bums me out. I will never ever forget that day on the line though. My whole time working there was crazy, but that experience with B was by far the craziest. This story involves my encounter with the serial killer in 1996. I was 22 years old and living in Terrebonne, Louisiana. I was living with my cousin at the time, and we were doing construction work, and our existences revolved around getting trashed on the weekend. One Friday night, we went out with a coworker, Josh. We met Josh at his house in Homa and headed out. We hit the bars, and I was determined to get laid by 1 a.m., and I had completely struck out for the night. I was at the point of my alcohol consumption that I knew I wasn't going to have any success with the ladies. So we headed back to Josh's and couldn't manage to find our way back in our drunken states, and ended up in a section of town none of us had been to before. We came across another bar, and Josh convinced us that it was a good idea to go inside. Within 30 seconds of entering the bar, it was very obvious that it was a gay bar. None of us were gay, but we agreed with some prodding from Josh that we would stay and have a few drinks. I started getting advanced on by a heavy-set man. I make it apparent as quickly as possible that I'm not gay and that he should leave. He seems to accept this, but continues to spark up a conversation with me. I find him somewhat interesting, mainly due to his open sexuality, which I was new to. And about half an hour goes by, and the bar is dying down, and we continued chatting. He said that he lived nearby and that all three of us can crash with him and head out in the morning. At this point, he hadn't set off any alarm bells, especially not in my drunken state. I convinced Josh and my cousin that the guy was cool and that we had a nice place to stay nearby. They eventually trust my judgment and we head out. Eventually we find ourselves in a small trailer park. We get to his trailer and things start to get fucking weird. He had a giant bulletin board with pictures of men on it. Under the men's pictures were descriptions like loose fuck, rugged butt, white boys tight ass tees, and so forth. Just weird shit. My cousin even commented on it, and he stated that he likes to remember his partners. Okay. We were too drunk to even give a shit, and just wanted to get this night over with. But in the middle of the night at about 4 a.m., we were woken up by him screaming about,
"If you're gonna sleep in my house, you're gonna have to pay."
We naturally ask him what the fuck he's doing, and he insists that we were teasing him and want a good fucking. We eventually calmed him down and got the fuck out of there. 7 years later, I realized that the man was Ronald Dominique, who was eventually convicted of 23 murders of homosexual men. This was in 1996, and I often struggle with guilt over if I should have done something and contacted the police based on the weird vibes that he gave off and his inappropriate behavior. At the time of his conviction, I had long moved from Louisiana and was living in Northern Oregon. At the time of the story, I was 19, staying late at the college darkroom to develop some film for my photography classes. The photography building was a dark, rickety hulk near some lonely railroad tracks and a little traveled part of campus. I had finished developing my film close to midnight and headed out, nervous as always to be alone at night in this deserted part of town. It was dark, and several of the streetlights around the parking lot were out, and the few that remained were phoning it in, putting on a weak, flickery light that did nothing to reassure me as I headed toward my car. I heard him before I saw him. A scrape of feet on asphalt. He said,
"Hey, can you do me a favor?"
I was startled and dropped my keys, and he mumbled an apology for scaring me. I noticed that he was wearing a jogging suit and limping. "What do you need?" I said. He hobbled a step or two toward me. "I think I sprained my ankle. Could you take me to the ER?" The university hospital was a short distance down the road. I hesitated. The guy looked perfectly pleasant, and he did seem to be in pain, but I'd recently finished a book about serial killer Ted Bundy, who lured some of his victims by pretending to have a broken arm and asking for their help carrying books to his car. When they leaned over to put his stuff in the passenger seat of his VW Bug, he knocked them unconscious with a crowbar and stuffed them inside. This scene played across my mind as I looked at the guy. It also occurred to me to wonder why the hell anyone would want to jog in this creepy part of town. "I'm sorry, I can't do that, but I could call someone for you. There's a phone in the photography building over there."
"There's nobody to call. I just moved here. I don't really know anybody. Can you just drive me? It's right down Limestone Avenue."
And he leaned against a car and winced as he reached down to rub his ankle. I'll call you an ambulance," I offered.
"No, I can't afford that. I don't have health insurance. Can you just drive me? I'll pay you $20.
There was something in the way he said that last bit. Something wrong. Like that exercise in my acting class where we had to recite, "Mary had a little lamb," as though we were delivering a tragic monologue or a furious rant. There was a tone rising up that didn't quite match the words he was saying, a raw urgency that had reached down inside me and hit the panic button hard. There was a moment of silence between us. I can't help you," I said. "I'm leaving." I gripped my keys, slipping them between my fingers, the way my mom had taught me, so I could use them as a weapon if he came at me. I kept my eyes on him as I speed walked the last few feet to my car. He watched me drive away, still leaning against that car, a flat expression on his face. Away from the dark parking lot, driving through the campus with my music turned up, the fear faded. I started to feel a little guilty for leaving the guy there, although I knew I'd done what my mom and dad would have wanted me to do. I was about to turn into my dorm parking lot when I realized I needed to pick up some breakfast for the next morning, so I turned around and headed back in the direction I'd come. About a minute down the road, my stomach clenched. There was the guy in the jogging suit running along the sidewalk. His ankle was perfectly fine. Later that summer, 2 students in my college were attacked by those same railroad tracks. The girl survived, but her boyfriend died. The man who attacked them was a serial killer dubbed the Railroad Killer by police. He murdered dozens of people across several states, most of them near railroad tracks. I didn't see his mugshot on TV until a few years later, but the picture broke me out in the same icy sweat I felt when I saw that guy running down the street. I can't be 100% positive, but my gut tells me that I escaped a serial killer that night.